Good morning, everyone. We're glad you're here with us today for our second Wonder Grant presentation. I am Dave Bryant, the VP of Sales with One Workplace, and I will be our moderator today. So hopefully you were here with us last week when we had HPS present their research on the importance of sustainability in interior architecture and design and the tools that can be used to measure carbon reduction. And I really hope you get a chance to go to the link where the presentation, you can view the presentation from last week, as well as take a look at the research, which is now posted. Next week, as a little bit of a sneak peek, we have just an incredible firm that's going to be presenting for us to round out the trio of our presentations. HPC will be talking about how to use immersive visual communication technologies like BIM, VR, AR, MR, and how to use those during the project process to turn essentially clients into partners and to have them be active participants throughout the design and project process. I think you're really going to find it inspiring, and I think it will really be a great presentation that you won't want to miss. That's June 10th, so make sure you go back out and you register for that as well. Now, over a year ago, we challenged the A&D community here in the South Bay area initially to start as just kind of a test to really hone and bring to the forefront their points of view and research showing thought leadership and how that could benefit the entire architecture and design community. We wanted to show that this community of really thought leaders had a lot in the tank, and they had a lot to bring forward and maybe just needed a vehicle to do that. And we wanted to be a catalyst for that. And as such, Wonder Grant was born. The thing that we weren't expecting was what had happened in the process. And what really created was a magic experience, the magic of community, quite frankly. And although we only funded 3 grants initially for the work that was done, there was a larger collective community that came together to share their thoughts and ideas for grants that would be considered. And I think the thing, and probably the most valuable byproduct besides the research and the work itself, was really the community that it created. Ever since the first evening where all the firms shared their ideas and what they were really trying to accomplish, we've continued a dialogue amongst these firms as a community. And we never saw that coming. And so the thing that was most sticky was how this community has stayed together. A good example of that is every single week we have a principals call of design firm principals who say, I'd love to have a community of my colleagues and peers where we can sit down and share thoughts and ideas. We can talk about trends as a community and what our collective perspective is. Through COVID-19, this community has really sat next to each other and said, and challenged each other as to how they're allowing their designers to come back to work and what types of protocols each are putting in place and how do they support home office solutions for architects and designers that still have to continue to do work even though they're not going into the office. And it's really been a special community that I've been able to be a part of. And so I would just say, if you're on this call and you're a design firm principal and you're saying, I'd love to be a part of a community like that, and I'd like to join that community. If you're North Bay, or in the whole Bay Area, or you're in Sacramento, and you say, I want to be a part of that community and would like to participate in that conversation, we'd like to welcome you. So feel free to reach out to myself or to Amy Neva or to Lee Knight, and we'd love to connect you. So today, without further ado, today is the second of 3 presentations, and we are so honored to have HGA join us today and share their thoughtful insights and research. And throughout the presentation, I would encourage you to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen to share questions that you would like to have part of the dialogue at the end of the presentation today. We will have a Q&A session where we'll pose those questions and really get continued dialogue around the work that HGA has done. And it may be a little bit of an afterglow. So if we go a little past time, we want you to still include those Q&A questions there. We'll try to address as many of those as we can. but then we want you to reference back to the video, which we'll post on our site, as well as the research will be posted there to get the full effect of today's presentations and questions and answers time. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over and introduce Amy Neva. She has really been a Wonder Grant champion for us, and she's going to talk a little bit about how you might be able to get involved and participate in Wonder Grant 2020, and to introduce our presenters today. So Amy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Dave. I'm so excited to be continuing the Wonder Grant 2020. Again, we're looking to fund firms like yourselves who are looking to explore key business or creative drivers impacting the built environment or interiors industry. As Dave mentioned, last year we had 3 recipients of the Wonder Grant, and this year we're looking to add a 4th one. Up to $20,000 can be granted to your firm based on these criteria. We've expanded our geography to include the San Francisco Bay Area as well as Sacramento. So take a look at our Wonder Grant link and register. Grant submissions are due by July 22nd. Just like last year, we'll be giving each applicant a $750 stipend to cover any expenses you've incurred during the application process. I really look forward to seeing your applications and ideas. We are so excited to be able to introduce our newest grant recipient, HGA. HGA was founded in 1953 and has more than 850 employees spanning the United States. Their San Jose team researched how the open office plan is working for engineers. They asked the question, what type of design will continue to support our engineers in the future? Their interdisciplinary team included a design anthropologist and a design strategist. HGA partnered with engineers of Fortune 500 companies to co-create solutions and advance the way we approach the workplace planning and design for our engineers. So I'm going to turn it over to the HGA team. Amin Mojtahedeh and Lisa Macaluso will be leading the presentation today. And then joining the Q&A will be Ada, Susan, and Krista. Lisa and Amin, take it away.
First of all, my team and I would like to thank One Workplace for this wonderful opportunity and this generous grant to address issues and attempt to provide solutions that the design industry deals with every day, but we don't always have the time or means to tackle. We would also like to give a special thanks to Katie Cesario and Chris Good from One Workplace for being our fearless leaders and coaches who always pushed our thinking even further during the whole process. I think Amin's going to share our presentation now. Our research application to One Workplace stemmed from a recent client that 2 weeks after moving into their new functional and beautiful headquarters building called me to schedule a meeting with a few of their engineers who were having distraction issues in their new open benching work environment. This call really made us think that facilities, who are typically our main client contact, does not always truly understand the needs of specific groups, including engineers. Plus, they are often mandated by corporate America's one-size-fits-all mindset, which calls to maximize headcount on the floors. We felt that we needed to somehow change this mindset and truly assist in creating spaces to let engineers and other users always do their best work. There seems to be a lack of user understanding happening because we as designers are often forced to move too fast during this critical get to know you period with our clients. We are often far removed from the end users. Because we are moving too fast, we need to advocate the subject of doing the sufficient research upfront to change the minds for the better.
Awesome. Before delving deep into the results of our project, I just wanted to share a couple of slides with you. The first one, kind of letting you know that the insights, that this presentation is about some of the insights that will help us design workplaces for engineers, but really what is on the other side of the coin for for creating these insights is the process that will help us to get to those insights. So the process piece in our research was a critical core component of our effort. Also, a little bit, one quick slide on our process in general. Our process, it was not just the discovery phase and getting into the problem space. We also got into the solution space and explored some options as for how would that workplace of the future for engineers would look like. Our, in terms of methodology, overall, we had a very successful 5-hour workshop at One Workplace's location, workplace. And there was a team of engineers from Fortune 500 engineering companies that got together. They went through a robust process of empathy, defining their problem, ideating solutions, and eventually coming up with some prototypes and solutions. And this is how the process, a typical design thinking process that we went through. But as most of us know, design thinking doesn't stop at like testing and prototyping. It's an iterative process. So we also took some of those responses, some of those insights and ideas that we came up with in the workshop, and we tested with 2 other engineering companies throughout a survey where 217 people total participated. With that, just delving deeper into the results, this presentation or this report has 2 chapters that I'm going to share with you. Each chapter starts with an insight, and then I built up on that insight with presenting some solutions. Both the insight and the solution were inspired from our workshop with a group of engineers from Fortune 500 engineering companies and the survey that I mentioned. So with that, starting with the first chapter, that is pivoting from privacy, because of course open plan offices don't have the best reputation when it comes to that. And during our design thinking workshop, we asked engineers to interview each other and really get deep into what they mean by privacy in open plan office. Some of the key responses that was also later verified by our survey were sudden changes in sound level, walk-ups, emails, too many meetings, recognizable kind of nearby conversation. And parallel to this, what was interesting was that engineers started sharing the stories of how they are super productive in situations that are perceived really busy and noisy with lots of distractions, like at an airport or a busy coffee shop. So we became curious. What is that state where you get to block all the distractions and get chunks of work done? Well, engineers' responses at first was that we don't know what that state is, but whatever it is, shouldn't have to be interrupted when we get into that state. So suddenly, all of those things that they previously identified were categorized under unexpected interruptions. Then we flipped this assumption and asked, tell us how uninterrupted work feels like. And then we got quotes like this: being able to stay in the zone and deliver without distractions, or when I'm in this state, it takes a while to get into it, but it's very easy to lose it. When I'm in this state, I feel comfortable and happy, or even my body is relaxed. So eventually, there was an engineer that said the worst thing that you can do to an engineer is to disrupt their flow state. So with that, the major insight here was that privacy is only one of the ways that will help us protect engineers' flow state, and that we need to do everything in our power to protect that, to protect flow state. Now, we needed a prompt to start ideating solutions to our challenge as design thinking sessions go. So we used one of the questions that was raised during the workshop: how might we make it obvious when an engineer is in the flow state? So we ideated a ton of diverse wild solution, again, as it goes in DT workshops, and we voted for the most viable ones that we were also, that the designer, the co-designers, the engineers were also passionate about executing. Then we got into prototyping, and we were so lucky to do this in Workplaces sites, by the way, because their warehouse looks like Alibaba's Cave of Wonders. So engineers looked around and they found things to play with and prototype with. So I know that you're curious about the final solutions that folks prototype, but each of these have a long story. So looking at the paper would be our best bet at this point. If we had enough time, I'm going to come back to these solutions at the end of the presentation. But then as it goes during prototyping sessions, the three main ideas: the headspace, magnetic memory pod, enclosure, adjustable desks. Each of them has a story in the paper overall. But then again, as it goes in during design thinking sessions, one thing that happened was that during our prototyping phase, and as engineers were prototyping, another version of the discovery phase happened. And another interesting insight was surfaced. While all these solutions were for individual engineers, we realized that flow state doesn't happen during individual tasks only. And there were subtle references in the survey that supported this. There are moments that team members really gel and they enter the flow state on the group level. And again, just like individuals, there were things that were disrupting teams' flow state. But this time, those disruptive things manifested themselves in hunting for meeting rooms. So again, and there are some codes to support that, like it's hard to switch the brain from problem solving to logistics, like finding a meeting room. And so again, we needed another prompt to ideate around this problem, and we asked ourselves, how might we help engineers to move from individual mode to mode of work to collaborative mode seamlessly and without hassle. And the result of this round of brainstorming was a diagram that compares 4 types of workspaces or workplaces, and the degree to which they support both individual flow state, which is the vertical line here, and the team flow state, which is the horizontal line. And that's where we came up with the Matryoshka concept. But before getting there, if you look at, for example, this diagram of a workplace where the zone for focus and teamwork are completely separated, it's highly supportive of the individual flow state, but not so much for the team's flow state. And as you create overlaps between the two and you get these places that are supportive of both focus and teamwork spaces, and they have shared and open spaces that do that, like a lot of places that we have open collaborative spaces, they become less and less supportive of the individual flow state and more supportive of the group flow state. And we have workplaces that are all dedicated to open spaces, that mostly open workplaces that we tend to call them. And open workplaces might be very good for seamless transition between modes of work, but not necessarily for teams, but not necessarily for individuals. So finally, we asked ourselves in a very diagrammatic fashion, what would it take for a workplace to maximize both the states for individual and for groups? And it could be something like this: a workplace, that's where we were inspired by the Matryoshka concept, that is nesting all of these spaces for focus inside the spaces for teamwork, inside a workplace that is supportive of focus and teamwork, and it has a lot of shared and open spaces. Now, we don't know what this workplace physically looks like, but at least we know what the diagram of it is. The third and final solution on this category, on this chapter, was creating situations where engineers can be anonymous inside their workplace. This way, their flow state won't be disrupted by their colleagues, because no one basically knows where or who they are. And we currently have places like this in our workplaces whose existence nowadays is being threatened by the COVID-19 conversation. So this solution basically makes a case about the key value of these spaces in the operation of engineering companies, and encourages leaders to think about these spaces as more than places for just food and casual conversations, but places that are key to their operation. So the second chapter has to do with pivoting from engineer's journey or engineer's experience journey. And it's a little bit weird for a group of people who practice human-centered design to suggest we need to pivot from the engineer, from a focus to engineer to something else, but bear with us. This insight was inspired by a long conversation during our workshop. One engineer started using the chip as an analogy for the workplace, and he told us that physical design engineers deal with the same problem as architects and designers. And physically, they try to put memory and standard cells of different sizes in a two-dimensional space. And all these cells are connected with wires, like corridors between the spaces. Then they work on it until they achieve the best optimization on the chip, and they optimize it for power and performance. So when it comes to the workplace, maybe we need to optimize the workplace for the job that it's supposed to do the best flow of work and the best operation. So this inspired us to shift our unit of analysis, which is unit of analysis is the main entity that is studied and analyzed, shifted from the engineer's journey to the broad project's journey or the project life cycle. And that's where we mapped what are the different phases that engineers go through when they're tackling a project in a team. And when we mapped their journey, the project life cycle, it is started from phase 1 to phase 7, and each phase is associated with a certain activity. All phase 7 is about, phase 6 and 7 are about closure and maintenance. But we also asked them, what is the amount of time that you're spending in each of these phases? So the green line is basically showing the length of the stay or the amount of time that people are spending in each of these phases. For example, phase 3 is the most popular one, or the most time-consuming one. We also asked them, what is the workload and the stress level on each of these phases? And you get a diagram like that. And the red line is showing that the phase 2, 3, and 4 are the workload is higher and the stress level is higher. Then we asked them the question that you all are probably anticipating. We asked them, what are the spaces that you go to get each of these works done, each of these phases done? And it starts with, we gave them a range of options from individual desks all the way to large enclosed meeting rooms. And as you can see, the individual desk, which is the green category, is getting larger and larger as they get closer to the end of their project. And the dark orange, which is the large enclosed meeting room with 5 to 20 people, is larger in the earlier phases of the project, and it gets smaller and smaller as we get closer to the end. So it basically gives us a sense of what are those spaces that engineers, that the project life cycle needs to survive and to be at its peak. And as you can see, for example, the need for a large enclosed room, we started analyzing. It kind of peaks in the beginning phases, it declines at the end phases. Same with the individual desk, it has its own journey, and a small enclosed meeting room has its own journey. And what is the moment that we start overlaying these different layers of data, if you get a place, if your large enclosed meeting room is where most of the stress and workload happens, probably those biophilic solutions need to be concentrated, for example, on this moment. Or if the same concept for places where have a larger share of the total process. With that, the life cycle of a project might need different constellations of its spaces that are supportive of its operation. At minimum, it might need a large enclosed meeting room for 5 to 20 people versus an individual desk. And at maximum, it needs all these other spaces that we identified in the research. And there is a range of other constellations that happen in between. And by the way, a lot of this work was done in conjunction with what we call the big data, which is our quantitative information. It's a word that we use. I know that it's not the accurate description of big data, but it's the word that we use to kind of separate the quantitative data from what we call the thick data, which is the more qualitative information that comes out of our investigations. Again, the Matryoshka concept holds true in this phase as well, in a sense that this constellation doesn't need to be dispersed or distributed in the office. These could be pieces of, these could be nested inside each other, according to the diagram that I showed you earlier. They could be all parts of many workplaces that are nested inside larger workplaces.
So we noticed, obviously, that great ideas came out of our deep dive with these engineers. But the big takeaway was that we need to optimize the workplace for the best flow of work for the people and their great ideas, and not always buy into the mandated standards. Isn't that what we always strive for as designers? Since we don't always get that opportunity, we need to advocate for that during programming with the front-facing client to involve the people that really matter. Why can't we change the design process and embrace the value of research and engagement of these employees to impact their own work and truly empathize with those employees? This is the power of a more insightful process. The best solutions for our clients come from this deep dive into their best asset, their people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. And the last thing is, again, balancing between the big data and the thick data. And one other thing is that some of these insights are specific, and that's what the process is advocating, is that they're specific to this project, and they might vary as long as we're using this process for other projects. They might vary. This is just to exhibit some of these insights. Again, might be translatable to your workplaces in terms of pivoting from privacy to a state of flow, or pivoting from engineers' journey to the project lifecycle. But then again, it's just to manifest how the interesting results that we can get as a result of following a particular process that has to do with co-creation, and what Lisa mentioned in terms of being empathetic to employees' needs, and making them part of the design journey. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and give the control back to Amy and Dave.
Thank you, guys. Wow, I think this this insight is something that I mean, I think it makes sense on a lot of levels when you look at the different types of work that's being done in the workplace. And I know it's really challenging to plan and design for that. But it looks like you guys really took a very specific need on full front. And in this market, obviously that's that topic and that that type of work is really significant. I don't want this to be a necessarily a totally COVID conversation, but a good majority of your work, or all the work and the research and the engagement, was done prior to COVID. I'm just curious as to how would your insights maybe change, or what is maybe emphasized or de-emphasized by a post-COVID workplace?
Hey, so I think that that's a really good question. I think that very often we design with our ears, listening to what our clients tell us. And that's such an important thing for our clients and for the business. But oftentimes this is simply not enough. So I wouldn't say that it will change it in some major way. I would say that, COVID-19 just supports, our understanding of the workplace a little bit out. Let's say it calls for the attention, for us to pay more attention to the things that people need. And so for our research per se, we gain greater insight in order to gain that, we have to champion for more time, not to just to collect the big data, but also the thick data and ask the questions why. WONEder grant has allowed us to do this deeper dive to understand what the engineers need. And one of those things that was revealed to us was really interesting. It was a very creative way to transform the work desk. And when I say transform, it was literally thinking about desk as almost like a transformer, flexing to the needs and different work states that the engineer goes through. So solving for the need to be able to focus on their work with the screens up, like the panels up, and then lowering them later for collaboration. So through our research, and though our research was done pre-COVID, like Dave mentioned, the transformer panel solution was, for acoustic reasons, began to support, and that was mainly to support focus work and the flow states. Interesting enough, this may be exactly what the future of the work desk may look like, So now we're not saying that this is exactly what the desk is going to look like, but the principal idea is the ability to flex and to transform, not just for acoustics, but also for protection as well. So we begin to think about the pandemic today and how we're all striving to solve for the now, the near, and the future. And for the now, we're in a bridging phase. We don't know a lot of things because things are in a flux and people are putting up dividers and panels and practicing distancing. But in the near future, we expect that there will be a vaccine. Will people then forget? Just like after the Spanish flu of 1980 was immediately preceded by the swinging 20s, will the barriers that we put up today impede progress and collaboration? And for the future, what if another virus hits? Will we be ready? So with this, just one idea of this transformer panels, and you'll see that in the research paper, and the ability to flex and transform, the importance of putting control of acoustics and protection in the hands of users and organization may be preparing the workplace for the flexibility and preparedness that we will need to survive another pandemic.
That's great. And I do want to have our audience participate in this Q&A. So if you have questions and answers, please go ahead and type those into the Q&A box below, and we'll continue this conversation. One of the things that I think a lot of companies are trying to deal with is the return to office and how to return to office. And I thought it was really interesting what your research focused on was not so much just the individual work that was being done, but the project process itself. Is there anything that you took away from your research as you think about guiding and directing customers back to the office based on project phase? Is there a return to office strategy that maybe companies who have a lot of technology engineers should consider versus maybe just which day of the week is your selected day of the week to be in the office? Is there anything that maybe you might consult on relative to a return to office strategy based on your research?
Lisa, do you want to answer that question, or Amin?
Well, having just ended a programming phase for one of our clients, of course, as we're deep diving with all of the different departments and department heads that we were meeting with, not always end users, but some end users were involved, which was great. But COVID-19 became a constant topic of discussion and how they were going to handle it. And honestly, I feel like in all the responses that we've heard during just a recent programming exercise, I felt like, yes, they're considering it, and there's these immediate things that need to occur to solve the problem. Well, maybe not solve it, but at least, attempt to make people feel safe when they go into the office. That I feel like even during this current programming process and the topic of discussion as being COVID-19, it really did focus in on that within a year, they feel like we don't need to immediately change everything that we're designing right now. That it needs to be, of course, looked at day one but that we don't have to go to those drastic changes that you know, for the rest of their lease term, which is 10 years. So that was the one thing that I've just recently learned on a programming exercise. But then contrary to that, I just did another one last week for a law firm. And, you know, we all know that attorneys like to have that private office space. Well, one of the things that they're considering is actually lessening the requirement for square footage moving forward, because they might share offices. Now, what I mean share is one person comes in 1, 2, 3 days a week, and then the other person comes in the opposite days, and then maybe they switch off, so that there's time to disinfect the office as they're trading day to day. So my opinion is, yes, there are long-term effects, but I think the clients that I'm working with more recently have said that they're going to just plan for the temporary.
If I could add quickly to what Lisa mentioned, one of the other things that we've done parallel to this research, and it's very helpful that it's informing this research, is that we launched a survey to 5,000 people of our clients, and they took the survey, and the analysis of the results, when you put it next to this, shows that people, that the workplace beats home for certain collaborative activities, collaborative and social activities, and home beats workplace for many individual heads down activities. So knowing throughout the life cycle of the project, what are those moments that you need to do individual work and you can stay at home, and what are those moments that you need to do collaborative work and you come to the workplace and do the collaborative work as effectively as possible, identifying that for each team, and then putting all these life cycle journeys for teams next to each other to see which teams you want to have in the workplace and when, compared to the teams that could stay home in particular times, is the information that is useful to a lot of our clients today.
That's thank you for that. The great insights there. I think kind of in line with that, we got a question that's asking, what are the other experiences away from the desk that might be valuable for finding flow? You talked about, you talked about team flow, not just individual flow, but team flow. But what other experiences away from the desk are important to find flow?
I think that's a Krista question, but yeah, Susan, feel free to take.
Krista, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Well, during our research, we heard from people about what qualities of spaces help them find and stay in a state of flow. And a lot of these qualities can kind of manifest in either individual desk spaces or in spaces around their home office or the physical office as well. So some of those qualities were things like comfort, ownership of a space. People feel more in a state of flow when they recognize the things around their desk. They have, photos of friends and family, or they have some personalization over their workspace. And also things like access to the outdoors. So people, like that connection to nature throughout the day. So providing these different types of experiences in a number of different settings can help people find a state of flow, no matter which space they're moving throughout their day.
And I would like to add to that too. So we're continuing to do research and to do thinking, pieces of what the workplace would look like, in the future. And we want to bring the joy of going back to the office, and what would constitute joy, right? And so as we, tackling that together with this particular research about flow states, we're thinking that, the future of the workplace may, not to give the thinking away, but maybe I'm going to give it away, but I think that it will incorporate a little bit more of almost like a coding cave, but in your own silo spaces. So what I call them silo lounges. So you are in an open space, almost like a collaboration lounge or things like that. But a lot of them will have the silo ability, whether it is through, you're going to have maybe an increased amount of technology around you, whether it's movable, kind of like monitors and things like that, but you're going to be siloed, and you're going to see a lot of things that probably protect the flow state, you know, like maybe there are some rules around, you know, not talking, not taking, not interrupting someone, not taking phone calls in their areas and things like that. But it's still going to be a beautiful environment, because if we want people to go back, you know, for any reason at all, and the reason in one of our surveys says that people miss the collaboration, but how do you go back and still be able to do your work? So that's one of the things that we are seeing that may come up as being important, like a new add to the workplace.
So when you say these coding caves, in my mind, it sounds different, right? If you're explaining that to a customer, that's very different than maybe what I had in mind when they engaged you for the work. I guess one of the questions I have is based on what your findings were, is there a cost implicated? Like, is there a premium to design a space like this, or not so much the design of it? Because I think it makes sense that there would be more hours and needing to discover specifically for the client, but relative to the built out environment, would a built out environment using these design thinking principles cost more than maybe what a traditional one where you didn't apply this thinking to?
So I would say that we're not anticipating that there's going to be a lot more like walls and things like that. Maybe there is going to be some, you know, maybe like smaller, maybe almost like a workstation, but an enclosed workstation with glass or something like that. But it's going to be, the footprint is going to be really small, but we don't anticipate it to be like everywhere. And in terms of the coding caves, you know, I'm just thinking about high, what do you call it? Like high back chairs that shield you in some way, but then they are arranged in a almost like almost like a lounge-like area, you know. So you're not tethered to the desk, because if it's a desk, you can get that at home. So what would bring you back to the workplace is to create things that are difficult to replicate. Is it, you know, nature? Is it, you know, this technology that you have? So those are the beginning of thinking that, of some of the thinking that we are exploring right now. And that, you know, the idea of that flow state, the protection of that flow state, I think you see that really important. That's the reason why people want to stay at home. That focus time is important.
Well, during our design thinking workshop with the engineers, at the very end, there was that revelation that Amin went into kind of in a short amount of time with the chip. But what we kind of came to the conclusion is that a lot of these engineering teams, to keep that flow, it would be kind of their own individual team work environment, which has the different needs for each engineering team to be able to do their best work. So in terms of cost, is creating these own little, these, you know, like call them suites of engineering teams going to cost more? Maybe, because, but what you're doing is instead of providing, you know, just a sea of benching workstations and then those second and third spaces for the engineers to go do their collaboration aspects of their work, it's going to be smaller communities of space. So you may be building the same amount of space, but you're combining it into a team suite, if you will.
So you referenced a lot of this discovery came out of some work you did with a client. So what can you tell us maybe what's happened since, and have you been able to either go back or is there an opportunity to potentially go back and maybe make some adjustments to that environment to see if it provides a different outcome?
Well, it's really funny. One of the projects that I just mentioned that we just finished programming on, we're just starting the space planning phase, and their engineering group, it just so happened that they wanted more individual suites of space because it's mandated by the fact that they need a high secure environment for their clientele. So so it's kind of working out in that project to really, you know, kind of learn from what we learned during this exercise. So it just so happened that that client needed those separate engineering spaces to keep security.
That's great. So I think a lot of customers are thinking about different real estate strategies. And so you talked about working from home being the right fit for at the right time, depending on project phase. You talked about the different types of space, maybe in the office, and I'll use air quotes there. Do you see the value? There seems to be a groundswell of interest in flexible office as an option. I think some of that is relative to post-COVID, but relative to needing to find different types of spaces to support different times of work and different phases. Do you see a value in some of the temporary spaces or flexible office spaces that might be available to accomplish this as a way to remove some distractions, but also create the right team space that for team flow?
Are you talking about satellite offices, Dave?
Yeah, I think temporary spaces could be potentially a satellite or flexible off space that's maybe off campus or close to campus. But I think it also could be taking an area within the traditional space and creating a temporary environment for that team. Like you talked about needing to have people, individuals make their own changes in the space. But do you see value, whether it's a flexible offsite space or whether it's a flexible in-office space to be created through the project process?
Yeah, I think that the solutions, the different solutions will, and we're seeing a lot of, different things coming up in the market, whether it is more satellite spaces, smaller HQ, nobody's going to come into work to, no, we need to come back to work. I think that, we mentioned this before, it's really not a one size fits all. The value is what the organizations perceive it to be. It needs to be, we really need to work around what makes that organization tick and what is the most value to them and the workers and why they have to do it particular way. So, I can't tell you, so I can tell you that this may be a good value for one company, but may not work for another company. So I think that the organization itself needs to find out how they work and why they want. So it's just not the big data, what do you need, how do you want to do it, but also why do we need to do it, and and what value does it bring to us, and how can we solve for that?
Building on what Susan just mentioned, I guess a morale of this story, of this research. The insights on state of flow were really interesting. Were really interesting and inspiring for us as designers. We looked at it and we're like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Let's shift the focus from privacy. Let's look at the life cycle of the project. But the morale of the story is that if you follow the process and tap into the genius of your organization and start co-creating with a group of smart people who have insight into their own operation, you get really interesting solutions. So these solutions might be anything for the next project. To Susan's point, it might be completely tailored to the next organization. So there is a level of transferability of these insights, Dave, as you're asking. Are there going to be flex spaces inside the workplace where people can manipulate it? Which is another research topic in and of itself. But at the same time, yeah, the answer could totally be yes. based on, again, following the process and then seeing what comes out of that cohort of people that get together and maybe come up with totally different insights that are helpful to the operation of their own organization.
So we're winding down a little bit. I've got one or maybe two more questions to ask you. We've talked a lot about the built environment. We've talked to you. You even referenced screens and dividers, which are very physical things. What sort of digital or virtual tools do you think might play a role in the future work experience that maybe you discovered? Saw a couple of things that you had posted in some of your renderings, but what are some of the digital or virtual tools that you think might need to be able to support this type of work?
One thing that I will quickly add, and then Susan and Lisa and Krista, feel free to add on it, is that one thing that we're seeing in our larger survey that 5,000 people took is that people are not necessarily excited to come back to the workplace to get into dividers and do heads down work. Home is doing a way better job of doing of supporting focused work. So people are not really craving, hey, I can't wait go back to sit between dividers, and people are coming back to get together and collaborate and enjoy the sense of community and the social aspect of the workplace. These are the aspects that they're missing. To respond to your question, any type of technology, now Susan and Lisa can list the may or may not want to list the names, but any type of technology that will allow for the presence of the body as opposed to sharing face-to-face knowledge would be superior, as collaboration and being involved in social activities is a bodily practice, is a bodily act, as opposed to a facial or a kind of a knowledge exchange practice.
And then in terms of the technology, I think that there's a lot of technology out there. You know, whether it's digital whiteboarding, you know, or, and you just have to look at what your organization is looking for. You know, if you're thinking about, you know, yeah, we're still in this pandemic state, but we need to come together to ideate in some way, and we need a whiteboard and things like that. I mean, there are apps, you know, that can do that, you know, and also, you know, Amin was talking about, you know, whether it's AR or VR. I think people are thinking about using that almost like, you know, you're going into a conference room with Yoda or something in Star Wars. I think, you know, it runs the gamut. Technology is not all, you know, kind of like spelled out for us right now. But I think that this is the wonder and the interesting thing about this period of time. That people begin to ideate, people begin to invent because of the need to do something, right? They're not going to sit back and say, okay, I can't do this, so that's it. And the human mind is just that we're going to begin to ideate, we're going to plan, we're going to make things better. I think it's going to be interesting, it's going to be great.
So I have one last question, and then we'll wrap. What surprised you most about your research findings? You go into the research thinking we're onto something here, and you have some preconceived ideas, but what surprised you most through this process about what you found out?
I'll share my own surprise. I guess like our industry, architecture and design and architecture in general, has a level of romanticism associated with it in vocabulary, in aesthetics, in planning. So where do you go to get that source? What is the source of that romanticism? I guess like engineers would be my last choice to go to get it from. But this workshop, like getting involved with these folks and then listening to them to see how they use the chip as an analogy, and really talking about their space and their deep knowledge about their internal operation. I always start these design thinking processes not feeling surprised because I know interesting things are going to come out of it, but always leave it with a higher level of astonishment and surprise, because I always see the deep insight that people have into the operation of their work and knowing themselves. And as opposed to, and even like that whole level of romanticism and poetry that people, that end users use to describe their work and their experiences. But Lisa, Krista, Susan, if you have any surprises, feel free.
Well, I mean, the one thing that I would add on to that is the fact that we dealt with engineers in a design thinking workshop. I thought, oh my God, their eyes are gonna go roll in the back of their head, and a lot of engineers don't think, the design thinking way. But so I feel like at first we struggled getting information out of them, but the last, like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of the workshop where they prototyped in One Workplace's space, just having them, we almost couldn't get rid of them. They were so excited with the results that they were having fun talking about the possibilities. So that was my biggest surprise, is that these nerdy engineers actually got into it a little.
That's awesome. It was, I saw the pictures of that event, and you're right. It seems like all of a sudden they activated when they got into the creative mode, which was interesting. Well, let me just say on behalf of One Workplace and the entire audience today, thank you, HGA. Your work is really insightful, and I think it's really important to be able to look at subsets. Sometimes we quantify customers and we say open plan, and we activate and we say, okay, we've got to have a certain number of these and a certain number of those, and that will create a really inspiring workspace. And you really focused, I think, on the human side of this, which I know is a really passionate focus for us at One Workplace, but you're really focused on what does that engineer need to best do their work. And I think that's really a meaningful design thinking point of view. So thank you for that. At the beginning, you thanked Katie Cesario and Chris Good, who were kind of coaches who walked alongside of you. There are actually a series of coaches that worked with each firm, and I'd just like to thank them now. Besides Chris and Katie, CCB, our own Carolyn Clark Beadle, was one of those coaches for one of the firms, and Teresa Budget, who was really she was our cruise director in this whole thing. Not only was she a coach, but she was a cruise director and kind of kept the wheels on the bus and put the whole thing together. And I remember sitting down with Teresa and giving her the crazy idea, and she's like, I got this. And within a week, she had it all put together. So there's a lot of people and our marketing team and a lot of people that make this happen. So thank you for calling that out. I want to thank them too. I want to turn everybody back to the website and go and read the research that was published. It's hard to really take that amount of body of research and work and get it all out in 17 minutes. So please go read the research. You can access that on our website, on the Wonder Grant site. And I want you to come back, look at the research from last week, come back next week and see what HPC has to present. But we're so thankful everybody joined us today, and we're really excited about sharing the work that came out of this year's Wonder Grant. And of course, with Wonder Grant 2020, we're super excited for what's going to come next and the thinking that's going to come out of this incredible community. Make sure you go and register for next week's webinar, and we'll look forward to seeing you back then. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.